The morning sun pierced through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Hartwell Industries' 42nd floor, casting long golden shadows across the most opulent boardroom in Manhattan. Crystal chandeliers, worth more than most people's homes, hung, suspended above a mahogany conference table that had witnessed the birth and death of billion-dollar empires. The air itself seemed to hum with the electricity of power and privilege, thick with the scent of Italian leather chairs and the kind of old money that didn't need to announce itself. It simply was. At precisely 8:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in September, the most important shareholders' meeting in Hartwell Industries' 50-year history was about to begin. 500 of America's most powerful investors were filing into the gleaming marble lobby 30 floors below, their Armani suits and Hermes briefcases creating a parade of wealth that would make kings envious. These were the titans of industry, the puppet masters who moved markets with whispered conversations and controlled the financial destiny of millions with casual handshakes. But none of them noticed the man who had been preparing for their arrival since 5 a.m. Marcus Johnson moved through the boardroom with the quiet efficiency of someone who had perfected the art of invisibility. At 45, his dark skin showed the weathered lines of a man who had worked with his hands for decades, his graying temples adding dignity to a face that carried both wisdom and weariness in equal measure. He wore the standard navy blue uniform of Hartwell Industries' maintenance staff, the fabric soft from countless washes, but impeccably clean. His name embroidered in simple white letters above the breast pocket like a badge of honor that others treated as a mark of servitude. His weathered hands moved with methodical precision as he polished the mahogany table surface to a mirror shine, each stroke deliberate and careful. These were hands that had cleaned 1,000 boardrooms, emptied countless trash cans, and mopped miles of marble floors, while the titans of industry conducted their business around him, as if he were part of the furniture. Invisible, disposable, beneath notice. Marcus paused in his polishing to adjust the leather chairs around the table, ensuring each one was positioned at the exact angle that would maximize comfort for the powerful men and women who would soon occupy them. His movements were those of a craftsman who took pride in his work, regardless of how others perceived its value. In the 5 years he had worked these floors, Marcus had learned that excellence was its own reward, especially when that excellence went unrecognized by those who benefited from it. The executive elevator chimed softly, and the first wave of board members began to emerge into the reception area outside the boardroom. Marcus could hear their voices through the glass walls, the confident tones of people who had never doubted their place in the world, who had never wondered if their next paycheck would cover rent, who had never been made to feel small by someone else's assumptions about their worth. Senior Vice President Richard Blackstone was among the first to arrive, his 6-foot frame carrying itself with the swagger of inherited privilege and cultivated arrogance. At 52, Blackstone had the kind of silver-streaked hair that looked distinguished in boardrooms and the cold blue eyes of a predator who had never met prey he couldn't break. His Seville rose suit probably cost more than Marcus made in 3 months, and he wore it like armor against a world he believed owed him deference. Blackstone's gaze swept across the boardroom and landed on Marcus with the casual dismissal of a king noticing a servant. "Morning, boy," he said, his voice carrying the kind of false friendliness that barely concealed its venom. "Make sure you're finished up in here before the real people arrive. We've got important business to discuss, and we can't have the help cluttering up the place." Marcus's hands never paused in their polishing, but something flickered behind his eyes, not anger, though he had every right to it, but something deeper, more patient. A man who had spent decades learning that dignity was something you carried inside yourself, something that couldn't be taken away by small men with big titles and bigger egos. "Of course, Mr. Blackstone," Marcus replied quietly, his voice carrying the practiced deference of someone who had mastered the art of strategic invisibility. "I'll be out of your way shortly." Blackstone's laugh was sharp and cold, the sound of someone who found genuine pleasure in making others feel small. "That's what I like to hear. A man who knows his place." He turned to address the other executives who were filing into the reception area, his voice carrying clearly through the glass. "This is how you handle the help, gentlemen. Firm but fair. They understand the natural order of things. The natural order of things. Marcus had heard variations of that phrase his entire life, usually from men who looked exactly like Richard Blackstone. Men who measured worth by stock portfolios and zip codes, who believed that accident of birth was achievement, who confused privilege with intelligence and inheritance with insight. What none of them knew, what none of them could possibly imagine as they prepared for what they believed would be just another routine shareholders meeting, was that Marcus Johnson had been preparing for this moment for 5 years. 5 years of invisible observation, of listening to their casual cruelties and careful strategies, of documenting their assumptions and exploiting their blindness. 5 years of being underestimated by people who confused his job title with his intelligence, his uniform with his potential, his quiet dignity with submission. Board members continued to filter into the reception area, their conversations creating a symphony of corporate power. Marcus could hear fragments of their discussions through the glass. Merger talks, acquisition strategies, personnel decisions that would affect thousands of lives with the casual ease of God's reshuffling mortals. The new owner is supposed to address us personally, someone was saying. Nobody knows who it is. Bought 51% through shell companies over the past 2 years. Hostile takeover, another voice replied with obvious distaste. Probably some tech bro who thinks he can waltz in here and tell us how to run a real business. We'll crush him in committee. Blackstone's voice cut through the chatter with cold confidence. Whoever this amateur is, he's about to learn what happens when you try to play in the big leagues without understanding the rules. Marcus continued his methodical polishing, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The rules. If only they knew how thoroughly he had studied their rules, how completely he understood their game, how perfectly he had learned to use their own assumptions against them. The reception area was filling up now, a gathering of the most powerful people in American business, each one worth more than most small countries' GDP. They stood in clusters, discussing strategies and contingencies, preparing for what they assumed would be a battle for control of their empire. None of them spared a glance for the janitor preparing their battlefield. At 8:55 a.m., Marcus finished his polishing and began to gather his cleaning supplies. The mahogany table now gleamed like a mirror, reflecting the crystal chandeliers above in perfect clarity. Each leather chair was positioned with mathematical precision. The boardroom was ready for the most important meeting in Hartwell Industries history. As Marcus prepared to leave, he paused at the head of the table, his hand resting briefly on the back of the chairman's chair. For just a moment, his carefully maintained expression of deference slipped, revealing something else entirely. The quiet confidence of a man who knew exactly what was about to happen, who had orchestrated every detail of this moment with the precision of a master conductor preparing for the symphony of his lifetime. Ladies and gentlemen, came the chairman's voice from the reception area, amplified by the intercom system. If you would please take your seats, we're ready to begin. Our new majority owner has requested to address you personally before assuming operational control of the company. Marcus set down his cleaning supplies and reached into his maintenance cart, retrieving something that had been hidden beneath the industrial-grade cleaning chemicals and microfiber cloths. A garment bag, expensive and precisely tailored, containing a secret that would shatter every assumption these powerful men and women had ever made about intelligence, worth, and the dangerous game of judging books by their covers. The shareholders were filing into the boardroom now, their conversations hushed with anticipation and underlying tension. 500 of the most powerful people in America, gathering to meet the mysterious billionaire who had somehow acquired controlling interest in their empire. Blackstone took his position at the front of the room, his chest puffed out with the confidence of a man who believed his authority was unquestionable, his superiority self-evident. He had no idea that he was about to receive an education in the difference between power and intelligence, between title and worth, between the assumptions of privilege and the reality of merit. The chairman called for order, his voice carrying across the packed boardroom. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Hartwell Industries' new majority owner and chief executive officer. Marcus Johnson slowly began to unzip the garment bag, revealing the perfectly tailored Armani suit that would transform him from invisible servant to undeniable master in the space of a single devastating moment. Mr. Marcus Johnson. The silence that followed was deafening, pregnant with shock and disbelief as 500 powerful minds struggled to process the impossible. But Marcus was just getting started, because this wasn't just about corporate takeovers or financial revenge. This was about teaching the world that intelligence doesn't wear a uniform, that dignity transcends job titles, and that sometimes the person you overlook, underestimate, and dismiss today might be the person holding your future in their hands tomorrow. But to understand how a janitor became a billionaire, how the invisible man became the most powerful person in the room, we need to go back 30 years to a small apartment in Southside Chicago, where a young boy learned from his mother that honest work was its own honor, even when the world refused to see it that way. 30 years earlier, in a cramped two-bedroom apartment on Chicago's South Side, 15-year-old Marcus Johnson sat at a wobbly kitchen table, his calculus homework spread across the scarred Formica surface like battle plans for a war he was determined to win. The apartment smelled of his mother's cooking, beans and rice stretched to feed 2 people for 3 days, and the distant sound of sirens painted the soundtrack of a neighborhood where dreams went to die and hope was a luxury most couldn't afford. Evelyn Johnson moved through their small kitchen with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had perfected the art of making something from nothing. At 38, she carried herself with the dignified exhaustion of someone who worked 3 jobs to keep her son's future alive. Hotel housekeeper from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., diner cook from 3 p.m. to 9 p.m., and night shift factory worker from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. Her hands, cracked and weathered from industrial cleaning chemicals and fryer oil, never stopped moving, never stopped creating small miracles from impossible circumstances. "Baby," she said softly, setting a cup of instant coffee beside Marcus's textbooks, "you don't have to study so hard. You're already the smartest boy in 3 zip codes." Marcus looked up from his equations, his eyes reflecting a determination that seemed too old for his young face. "Smart doesn't matter if people can't see it, Mama. I need to be so good they can't ignore me, so excellent they can't explain me away." Evelyn's smile was proud and heartbroken in equal measure. She had raised her son to believe in education as salvation, in hard work as virtue, in dignity as something no one could take away. But she had also lived long enough to know that in America, being exceptional while black wasn't enough. You had to be undeniable. "You remember what I taught you about invisible work?" she asked, sitting beside him at the table. "That the people who clean the buildings and cook the food and fix the broken things, we're the ones who keep the world running," Marcus recited. "They need us more than we need them, but they've convinced themselves it's the other way around." "That's right, baby. And one day, when you're running your own company, you remember that. You remember where you came from, and you treat people with the respect they deserve, not the respect their job title demands." Marcus nodded, but his mind was already racing ahead, already planning. He had watched his mother's employers treat her like furniture, present when needed, invisible when not. He had seen the casual cruelty of people who measured worth by paychecks and respect by job descriptions. And he had made a promise to himself that one day he would turn that system upside down. The scholarship letter from MIT had arrived 3 weeks later, changing everything and nothing simultaneously. Full ride, computer science program, a golden ticket to a world his neighbors could barely imagine. But Marcus had learned something important from watching his mother navigate 3 different workplaces. Sometimes the best way to understand power was to observe it from the shadows. Which is why, even as he packed for Boston and the most prestigious technical education in the world, Marcus had already made a decision that would shape the next 3 decades of his life. He would learn their systems, understand their weaknesses, and master their games. But he would do it from a position they would never suspect, from the invisible margins where real work happened and real intelligence went unnoticed. Because if there was one thing Evelyn Johnson had taught her son, it was that the person cleaning the room heard everything, saw everything, and remembered everything. And sometimes, that kind of information was more valuable than any degree, more powerful than any title, and more dangerous than any weapon. Marcus Johnson was about to become the most educated janitor in American history. And 30 years later, in a Manhattan boardroom filled with men who had never worked an honest day in their lives, that education was about to pay dividends they could never have imagined. Can you imagine having the vision at 15 years old to plan a 30-year strategy for success? Marcus Johnson didn't just survive poverty. He weaponized it, turning every slight and assumption into fuel for an empire they never saw coming. If you're loving this story of the ultimate long game, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because what you're about to hear about Marcus's journey from MIT genius to invisible billionaire will blow your mind. Trust me, the patience and brilliance he shows in the next phase of his plan will have you questioning everything you think you know about intelligence and strategy. Let's see how a janitor with a computer science degree started building an empire one office building at a time. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology's computer science lab hummed with the quiet intensity of brilliant minds reshaping the future. But at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday night in 1999, only one person remained among the banks of cutting-edge servers and quantum processors. Marcus Johnson sat hunched over a workstation, his fingers flying across the keyboard with the fluid precision of a concert pianist, lines of revolutionary code streaming across multiple monitors, like digital poetry written in a language only he seemed to understand. To any security guard making late-night rounds, Marcus appeared to be exactly what his uniform suggested: the night shift janitor, probably using the computer to check email or browse the internet. His MIT maintenance badge hung from a retractable cord. His navy blue coveralls bore the faded stains of honest work, and the industrial vacuum cleaner parked nearby completed the perfect camouflage. But what the casual observer couldn't see was that this janitor had graduated summa cum laude with dual degrees in computer science and electrical engineering, had already filed 17 provisional patents, and was currently developing software that would revolutionize logistics management for every major corporation in America. Marcus's strategy was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its effectiveness. By day, he attended classes, absorbed knowledge like a sponge, and maintained his perfect 4.0 GPA while working as campus maintenance staff to pay for his mother's medical bills and living expenses. By night, he transformed these same buildings into his private laboratory, using his janitor's access to work on projects that his professors couldn't have imagined, building systems that combined artificial intelligence with real-world observation in ways that academic theory had never contemplated. The breakthrough had come 6 months earlier, during his junior year, when Marcus realized that most business software was designed by programmers who had never set foot in an actual warehouse, distribution center, or manufacturing plant. They created elegant solutions for theoretical problems while completely missing the practical inefficiencies that any worker could identify in 5 minutes of observation. Marcus, who had spent summers working in his uncle's shipping business and countless hours watching his mother navigate the Byzantine systems of her various employers, understood something that MIT's brightest minds had overlooked: the people who actually did the work always knew how to do it better. His AI-powered logistics system wasn't just revolutionary. It was practically inevitable once someone bothered to ask the right questions. Instead of optimizing for theoretical efficiency, Marcus had designed software that learned from actual human behavior, that adapted to real-world constraints, that recognized the difference between what looked good on paper and what actually worked in practice. Early testing showed potential efficiency improvements of 40% across supply chain operations. Improvements worth billions of dollars to any company smart enough to implement them. But Marcus wasn't ready to reveal his hand. Not yet. He had learned from watching his mother's experiences that innovation without positioning was just charity for people who would take credit for your work while denying you recognition for your genius. So instead of approaching professors or seeking venture capital, Marcus had made a different choice. One that would seem insane to anyone who didn't understand the long game he was playing. Upon graduation, Marcus Johnson, MIT's most promising computer science graduate in a decade, had deliberately chosen to become a janitor at Tech Corp Industries, one of Boston's most prestigious technology companies. His classmates assumed he had suffered some kind of breakdown. His professors were bewildered by his decision to waste his talents on custodial work. His mother, though supportive, worried that her brilliant son was throwing away everything they had sacrificed to achieve. What none of them understood was that Marcus wasn't becoming a janitor. He was becoming a spy. And his target wasn't foreign governments or military secrets. His target was something far more valuable and infinitely more overlooked: the casual conversations, careless documents, and unguarded strategies of executives who had never learned to see past his uniform to the mind that was cataloging their every weakness, memorizing their every mistake, and preparing to turn their own blindness into the foundation of an empire they would never see coming. For 5 years, Marcus Johnson would clean their offices, empty their trash, and listen to their secrets, while building the most sophisticated business intelligence operation in corporate history. And when he was ready, when he had learned everything there was to know about their industry, their competitors, and their fatal flaws, he would emerge from the shadows to claim what his brilliance had earned. But first, he needed to meet the man who would become his perfect enemy, the executive whose arrogance would finally give Marcus the motivation to stop observing and start conquering. Richard Blackstone arrived at Hartwell Industries on a crisp October morning in 2019, his Bentley purring into the executive parking garage like a predator claiming new territory. At 51, he carried himself with the casual arrogance of inherited privilege wrapped in the veneer of earned authority, the most dangerous combination in corporate America. His Harvard MBA hung framed in his corner office, not because he was proud of the achievement, but because he enjoyed watching people's faces when they realized their janitor was being lectured by an Ivy League graduate. Blackstone had been hired as Senior Vice President of Operations with a mandate to optimize efficiency and eliminate redundancies, corporate euphemisms for cutting costs by any means necessary, regardless of human impact. His reputation preceded him like the scent of expensive cologne and moral decay. At his previous company, he had increased profits by 30% in 18 months, primarily by slashing benefits, outsourcing labor, and implementing what he called performance accountability measures that coincidentally seemed to target older employees, women, and minorities with surgical precision. Marcus Johnson had been watching executives like Blackstone for 5 years, but he had never encountered one quite this toxic, quite this perfectly designed to embody everything wrong with corporate America. Where other executives at least maintained professional facades, Blackstone wore his prejudices like designer accessories, visible to anyone who bothered to look, but expensive enough that most people pretended not to notice. The first encounter came on Blackstone's third day, during what the new VP called his facility orientation tour. Marcus was replacing burnt-out fluorescent bulbs in the 42nd floor corridor when Blackstone emerged from the executive elevator with HR Director Patricia Mills, his voice carrying the tone of someone explaining simple concepts to particularly slow children. The key to managing custodial staff, Blackstone was saying, completely unaware that Marcus could hear every word, is establishing clear hierarchies from day one. These people respond to authority, but you have to be firm. Give them an inch, and they'll take a mile. Patricia shifted uncomfortably, her professional smile faltering slightly. Mr. Blackstone, our maintenance staff are highly professional. We've never had issues with. Patricia, Blackstone interrupted with patronizing laughter. I can see you've been too soft with them. That's a common mistake in HR, confusing politeness with weakness. Watch how it's done. Marcus continued his work, methodically replacing the fluorescent tube, while every muscle in his body tensed. He had learned over the years to recognize the particular tone that preceded humiliation, the way certain men's voices changed when they spotted what they perceived as easy prey. You there, Blackstone called out, his voice carrying the casual authority of someone who had never doubted his right to command others. Janitor. Marcus turned slowly, his expression carefully neutral, his MIT-trained mind already cataloging every detail of this interaction for future reference. Yes, sir. Blackstone's smile was cold and calculating, the expression of a snake that had just spotted a particularly entertaining mouse. What's your name, boy? The word hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Boy. Marcus was 44 years old, had dual degrees from MIT, held 17 patents, and possessed enough insider knowledge to destroy half the companies on the Fortune 500. But to Richard Blackstone, he was simply boy, not because of his age, but because of the color of his skin and the uniform he wore. "Marcus Johnson, sir," he replied quietly, his voice carrying the practiced deference that had served as camouflage for half a decade. "Well, Marcus, I'm the new VP of Operations, which means I'm responsible for making sure this building runs efficiently. That includes making sure the help understands their place in the organization." Blackstone's eyes swept over Marcus's uniform with obvious disdain. "I trust we won't have any problems with attitude or work ethic?" Patricia Mills looked mortified, her face flushing with embarrassment for her new colleague's behavior. But she remained silent, trapped between professional courtesy and moral revulsion. The same paralysis that allowed men like Blackstone to operate with impunity throughout corporate America. "No problems at all, Mr. Blackstone," Marcus responded, his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest like pressure in a boiler. "I take pride in my work." Blackstone's laugh was harsh and dismissive. "I'm sure you do. Just remember, I'll be watching. In my experience, your people need constant supervision to maintain acceptable standards." Your people. There it was again, the casual racism wrapped in corporate speak, the assumption that Marcus's race somehow determined his character, work ethic, and intelligence. Blackstone had managed to communicate his complete worldview in two simple words, revealing himself as exactly the kind of executive Marcus had been preparing to destroy for the past 5 years. As Blackstone walked away, continuing his condescending commentary to the increasingly uncomfortable HR director, Marcus returned to his work with hands that trembled slightly, not from fear or hurt, but from the enormous effort it took to maintain his cover when every instinct screamed at him to reveal exactly who he was dealing with. That night, Marcus sat in his modest apartment, surrounded by laptops displaying real-time market data, corporate filings, and intelligence reports on Hartwell Industries' leadership structure. For 5 years, he had been content to observe, to learn, to build his empire quietly in the shadows. But Richard Blackstone had just made the fatal mistake of assuming that intelligence wore expensive suits and ignorance came in work uniforms. Marcus opened a new file on his secure server and began typing, "Operation Blackstone, target acquired." The hunter had just become the hunted, and Richard Blackstone had no idea that his casual cruelty had just signed his own professional death warrant. Marcus Johnson was done being invisible. It was time for the student to become the teacher, and the lesson was going to be devastating. The abuse escalated with the methodical precision of a man who had perfected the art of institutional cruelty over 2 decades. Blackstone's daily humiliations became as routine as morning coffee, each interaction carefully calibrated to remind Marcus of his place in the corporate hierarchy while providing Blackstone with the psychological satisfaction that came from exercising power over someone he perceived as powerless. It started with the trash. Every morning at precisely 9:15 a.m., Blackstone would deliberately knock over his wastebasket, scattering papers across his office floor with theatrical clumsiness. "Oops," he would say with mock concern as Marcus appeared to clean up the mess. "Looks like the help has more work to do. Hope that's not too challenging for you, Marcus." Then came the coffee incidents. Blackstone developed a habit of accidentally spilling his morning espresso during important meetings, always when Marcus was cleaning nearby conference rooms. "Clean that up, boy," he would announce loudly enough for clients and board members to hear. "Can't have the real business people slipping on your mess." But the most insidious abuse was verbal, the constant stream of microaggressions disguised as friendly conversation. "Marcus, you're pretty articulate for someone in your position," Blackstone would say with feigned surprise. "Did you finish high school?" The questions always came with that patronizing smile, delivered in the tone of someone offering compliments to a particularly clever pet. What Blackstone didn't realize was that every cruel word, every casual insult, every moment of deliberate humiliation was being meticulously documented by the most sophisticated surveillance operation in corporate history. Marcus had transformed his janitorial duties into an intelligence-gathering mission that would have impressed CIA operatives, using his invisible status to access information that executives spent millions trying to protect. The cleaning cart became his mobile command center, equipped with pinhole cameras disguised as air fresheners, digital recording devices hidden inside spray bottles, and wireless transmitters that uploaded everything to encrypted servers operating from his apartment. Marcus's MIT engineering background had taught him that the best surveillance systems were the ones nobody thought to look for. And who would suspect janitors cleaning supplies of containing military-grade espionage equipment? More importantly, Marcus discovered that Blackstone was a creature of habit who couldn't resist bragging about his schemes to anyone he considered beneath his notice. The man treated Marcus like a confessional booth, sharing insider information about planned layoffs, illegal stock manipulations, and discriminatory hiring practices with the casual ease of someone who believed servants didn't have ears, minds, or memories. "We're going to restructure the pension fund next quarter," Blackstone mentioned one morning while Marcus emptied his trash. "Move everything to offshore accounts where these people can't touch it. Let them work until they die. Builds character." His laugh was cold and calculating. "The beauty is, it's all perfectly legal, if you know which forms to file." Marcus continued his work with practiced invisibility, but his mind was racing. Securities fraud, pension theft, deliberate age discrimination. Blackstone was building a federal case against himself, one careless confession at a time. The breakthrough came during a private board meeting where Blackstone assumed Marcus was too simple to understand the complex financial maneuvers being discussed. As Marcus dusted bookshelves and emptied wastebaskets, Blackstone detailed his plan to manipulate quarterly earnings through shell companies and falsified contracts. Textbook securities, fraud worth tens of millions of dollars. That night, Marcus sat in his apartment reviewing hours of recorded evidence, documenting a pattern of corruption that would destroy not just Blackstone's career, but potentially land him in federal prison. 5 years of careful observation were finally paying dividends. But Marcus wasn't ready to spring his trap yet. He needed one more piece, controlling interest in Hartwell Industries itself. Because destroying Blackstone wasn't enough anymore. Marcus wanted to own the man who had spent 4 years treating him like property. The hunter was about to become the predator, and the game was about to change completely. While Blackstone spent his days perfecting new forms of institutional cruelty, Marcus Johnson was quietly purchasing his professional soul one share at a time. The acquisition strategy was a masterpiece of financial engineering that would have impressed Wall Street's most ruthless corporate raiders, if they had been intelligent enough to recognize it happening right under their noses. Marcus's AI logistics software had already generated over $200 million in licensing fees from companies desperate to optimize their supply chains. But instead of announcing his success or seeking venture capital, Marcus had created a web of shell companies more sophisticated than anything the Fortune 500 had ever seen. Johnson Holdings, Meridian Investments, Blackstone Capital. The irony of that last name was particularly satisfying. Each entity owned by others in an endless maze of corporate structures that led back to a modest apartment where a janitor managed an empire from his laptop. The beauty of Marcus's strategy lay in its patience and precision. Rather than attempting a traditional hostile takeover that would trigger defensive measures and regulatory scrutiny, he had spent 2 years systematically purchasing Hartwell Industries stock in small blocks through dozens of intermediaries. Pension funds selling underperforming assets, day traders cashing out modest gains, institutional investors rebalancing portfolios, all of them unknowingly selling pieces of Hartwell's future to the man who cleaned their offices. Blackstone, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware that his casual cruelties were being observed by the very person he was inadvertently empowering. Every morning brought new humiliations designed to reinforce the social hierarchy that Blackstone believed was ordained by nature itself. "Marcus," he would call out during executive meetings, "make sure you don't touch any important documents with those hands. Wouldn't want you to accidentally damage something valuable." The final purchase had come 6 months ago, a controlling stake of 51% acquired when Hartwell's largest institutional investor needed emergency liquidity during a market downturn. The transaction was so carefully structured through offshore entities that even Hartwell's own board of directors couldn't identify their new majority owner. Corporate lawyers had spent weeks trying to trace the ownership through shell companies and holding corporations, but every trail led to dead ends and legal black holes. Marcus had become the invisible king of a billion-dollar empire, with the power to hire and fire every executive who had ever looked through him like he was furniture. But power without revelation was just potential energy waiting for the perfect moment to transform into kinetic devastation. That moment was about to arrive in the form of a mandatory shareholders meeting, where Hartwell's mysterious new owner had requested to address the company personally before assuming operational control. Blackstone had spent weeks preparing for what he assumed would be a battle of wills with some tech billionaire or foreign investor. He had no idea that his opponent had been studying his weaknesses for 4 years while emptying his trash and enduring his insults. The predator was about to discover he had always been the prey. The boardroom fell into a silence so profound that the crystal chandeliers seemed to stop tinkling, as if the very atoms in the air had frozen in anticipation of what was about to unfold. 500 of America's most powerful business leaders sat motionless in their leather chairs, their minds struggling to process the impossible reality that was standing before them in navy blue coveralls and work boots. Richard Blackstone's face cycled through a spectrum of emotions like a broken kaleidoscope. Confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally, a dawning horror that drained the color from his cheeks and left his mouth hanging open like a fish gasping for oxygen. The man who had spent 4 years calling Marcus boy was now staring at his new boss, his new owner, his new judge and jury rolled into one devastating package. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus said, his voice carrying a quiet authority that filled every corner of the boardroom. "My name is Marcus Johnson, and I am your new chief executive officer and majority shareholder of Hartwell Industries." The transformation was nothing short of cinematic. Marcus reached into his cleaning cart and withdrew the garment bag that had been hidden beneath industrial cleaning supplies and microfiber cloths. With movements that were both deliberate and graceful, he began to remove his janitor's uniform, revealing the perfectly tailored Armani suit that had been waiting underneath like a butterfly emerging from its chrysalis. "For the past 5 years," Marcus continued as he straightened his Italian silk tie, "I've had the unique privilege of observing this company from a perspective that most CEOs never experience, from the ground up. I've cleaned your offices, emptied your trash, and listened to your conversations while you conducted business around me, as if I were invisible." Board members were reaching for their phones, whispering urgent conversations, their faces showing the panic of people who suddenly realized that every private conversation, every casual insult, every moment of assumed privacy had been witnessed by someone they had dismissed as irrelevant. Blackstone finally found his voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. "This is impossible. You're just a janitor?" Marcus's smile was sharp and knowing. "I'm also a summa cum laude graduate of MIT with dual degrees in computer science and electrical engineering. I hold 17 patents for revolutionary logistics software that your industry has been licensing for the past 3 years. And as of 6 months ago, I own 51% of this company." The revelation hit the room like a physical force. Executives who had barely acknowledged Marcus's existence were now staring at him with expressions of shock, fear, and dawning respect. The maintenance worker they had treated as furniture was revealing himself to be one of the most successful entrepreneurs in American business. "Mr. Blackstone," Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of 4 years of accumulated dignity and patient justice, "you once told me that you could see I was pretty articulate for someone in my position. You asked if I had finished high school. You spent years reminding me of my place in your hierarchy." Blackstone was visibly trembling now, his arrogance collapsing like a house of cards in a hurricane. "Marcus, we can work this out. I didn't know. I never meant." "You didn't know," Marcus repeated slowly, savoring each word. "You never meant. But you see, Mr. Blackstone, intention is irrelevant when the impact is systematic and deliberate. You treated me exactly as you intended to treat me, as something less than human because of my job title and the color of my skin. The boardroom was so quiet that the sound of Blackstone's labored breathing seemed to echo off the mahogany walls. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a tablet, its screen displaying years of recorded conversations, documented incidents, and carefully cataloged evidence. For 4 years, you've shared insider information with me, assuming I was too simple to understand complex financial maneuvers. You've detailed plans for pension fund manipulation, discussed illegal stock transactions, and outlined systematic discrimination policies, all because you believed that the person cleaning your office didn't have ears, memory, or intelligence. The transformation was complete. Marcus Johnson, the invisible janitor, had become Marcus Johnson, the most powerful person in the room. And Richard Blackstone, the arrogant executive who had built his career on the assumption that his victims would never fight back, was about to learn what accountability looked like when wielded by someone who understood both justice and corporate law. "Mr. Blackstone," Marcus said with quiet finality, "you're fired." The silence that followed Blackstone's termination was deafening. Security escorted the man who had terrorized employees for 4 years out of the building he would never enter again, his Armani suit and Harvard MBA suddenly meaningless in the face of Marcus's quiet justice. Within hours, federal investigators were reviewing the evidence Marcus had meticulously collected. Securities fraud, pension manipulation, systematic discrimination. Blackstone's recorded confessions became the foundation for criminal charges that would send him to federal prison for 8 years. The man who had measured worth by stock portfolios was about to discover what powerlessness really felt like. But Marcus's transformation of Hartwell Industries went far beyond personal revenge. His first act as CEO was revolutionary. A company-wide announcement that every maintenance, custodial, and service worker would receive immediate 40% salary increases and full healthcare benefits. The people who had been invisible were suddenly valued, respected, and properly compensated for keeping the world running. Patricia Mills, the HR director who had witnessed Blackstone's cruelty but remained silent, found herself face-to-face with the new CEO. "Mr. Johnson," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I should have spoken up." Marcus's response was gracious but firm. "Moving forward, we're implementing zero-tolerance policies for workplace discrimination. Every employee, regardless of title, deserves dignity and respect." I'm getting chills just thinking about the look on Blackstone's face when he realized the boy he'd been ordering around was actually a billionaire genius. Can you imagine spending 4 years thinking you're superior to someone, only to discover they were playing chess while you were playing checkers? If this story of ultimate workplace justice is blowing your mind, smash that like button and let me know in the comments. What would you say to a boss who treated you the way Blackstone treated Marcus? Because stories like this prove that intelligence doesn't wear a uniform, and sometimes the person you underestimate today might be the one holding your future tomorrow. Today, Marcus Johnson's story is taught in business schools as a masterclass in strategic patience and corporate intelligence. Hartwell Industries became the most employee-friendly company in America, proving that treating workers with dignity isn't just morally right, it's profitable. Blackstone served his 8 years in federal prison, his fortune depleted by legal fees and civil settlements. Upon release, he found that his reputation had preceded him. No company would hire the executive who had been exposed as both a criminal and a fool by his former janitor. Marcus kept his mother's picture on his desk in the corner office that had once belonged to men who never understood that excellence comes in all colors and all uniforms. Evelyn Johnson had passed away the year before Marcus revealed himself as CEO, but she had lived long enough to see her son purchase his first company. Her final words to him were prophetic. "Remember where you came from, baby, and treat people with the respect they deserve." Marcus Johnson proved that the most dangerous person in any room is the one you refuse to see. His story reminds us that intelligence transcends job titles, that dignity can't be measured by paychecks, and that sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming so successful that your enemy's opinions become irrelevant. Marcus Johnson's incredible journey from invisible janitor to billionaire CEO shows us what's possible when genius meets patience and prejudice meets justice. His story proves that the person cleaning your office today might own your company tomorrow, and that treating everyone with basic human dignity isn't just the right thing to do. It's the smart thing to do. If stories about underdogs who turn the tables on their oppressors inspire you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Next week, we're diving into the case of the dumb blonde secretary who exposed a massive corporate conspiracy. And the moment her sexist boss realized she had an MBA from Wharton will leave you speechless. Remember what Marcus taught us. Never judge someone's potential by their position, because the quiet observer in the corner might be the most powerful person in the room. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story of Justice Served Cold.